Previously on the Adventures of Cooper. It looks like some sort of portal.
Don't get too close. We don't know what we're dealing with.
Guys, it's pulling me in.
Cooper!
Oh, this isn't good. What's up YouTube, and welcome to another episode of the Adventures of Cooper series. In this series, remember you can download the comic book pages, and once you finish the tutorial you can add your design into the comic and follow along each time we come out with a new episode. Cooper's made his way through the portal onto a planet he doesn't know and fallen into the Cavern River, which has eventually brought him out closer towards this shore here, where he's faced with the weather that we do not know on a planet we also do not know. The canvas size for today is 2500 by 2500. The brushes you're going to need are the Lightning 2 brushes as well as Cooper's stamp as well. Both are linked in the description down below, where you'll also find the palette for today's design, but I'll throw the colours up on the screen now if you want to create it yourself. Be sure to drop a like down below for the Adventures of Cooper series, and with all that said, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go to our layers. We're going to change the background color to black. So we're going to tap on the background and we're going to double tap at the bottom of our disc to select black, but I've also popped it in the palette down below. Now, next thing we're going to want to do is draw in our sea level where Cooper has fallen into. So I'm just going to grab any color for the minute. So like the gray sort of color, doesn't really matter. And then if we go to our layers on this empty layer, we're going to go to our brush library. We're going to scroll down until we find the calligraphy section, and we're going to use the monoline brush. Doesn't matter what size your brush is at this point. All we're going to do is simply draw in straight across the screen to draw in our sea. Now it needs to be slightly less than halfway, so something roughly here. Pop your finger on the screen once you've held your pen at the end and you'll get a perfectly horizontal line. And then you can drag and drop your colour into this bottom section here. Now this is going to act as our floor. But for the minute, now that we can see the shape and we're happy with it, let's go to our colours and double tap to select black and drag and drop it into that space. So we won't see it for a moment now, but we've done a little bit of the groundwork. Next we're going to go to our colours and we're going to grab this purple here, the top colour in the top left hand corner of the palette. We're then going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer. I'm going to drag it underneath the floor. So we're going to start to work on the sky. And then we're going to go to our brush library. I'm going to go to airbrushing. I'm going to use the soft brush. Now what you can do is you want to try and just set your brush relatively big, but we're going to go for something about 30%, and we're just going to tap in the middle of the screen until we get like a little orb like that. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to zoom our canvas right out, and this is going to fill up the sky where the lightning is, so we need to fill it out with a lot of colour. So we're going to grab our cursor. I'm going to use the uniform option, and we're going to scale this right up. And then when we zoom back in, you can see now we start to identify where the floor is again, as well as the sky is starting to fill up with that sort of purple. So I'm actually going to zoom back out again, scale this up a little bit bigger until the center of my orb is sort of sitting right at the top of the screen, and I see the tiniest bit of the full sea level there from left to right. So you can just about make out the whole thing. And tap on your cursor when you're done, and you've got your night sky glow for the minute, and we may come back to this and lower the opacity down later on. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our layers now, and we're going to create our mountains. So behind our sea layer and in front of our night sky, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors, and we're going to double tap either at the bottom of the disc, or you can select black from the palette. We're continuing with the monoline brush, so we're going to go back to our brush library, calligraphy and monoline, and my brush is set to 1%. Now I've done it quite small so that we can get some nice texture in the mountains and hills that we're going to draw in. So we're drawing two sets of hills. We're drawing in some smaller, closer ones, and then two bigger ones in the background. So I'm going to start relatively close to the center, and I'm just literally just squiggling up and down, creating some nice rocky terrain like so, and then peel it all the way off to the edge on the right hand side. And then what you want to do is you want to start at your start point, go all the way around and link up to your end point, and then you should be able to drag and drop your colour into that space and fill in your mountain. We're then going to go to our layers and create a new layer and repeat the process but on the other side. So we're going to start somewhere roughly in the center here, and then create those lumps and the bumps, and try to bear in mind your other side. You don't want to create something too symmetrical, go all the way around, and you can hold your pen down if you want to, and then link all the way back up to your start point, and then drag and drop into that shape. And you may want to go in and maybe make some minor adjustments, like make an extra hill here, for example, because we want to send the person's eye into the center. So I've added a little extra lump over there on the left hand side. So it's pretty faint, but what I'll do is I'll change my background color so you can very quickly see, and you can maybe pause just to get an idea as to what I drew there. So I'm going to switch that back now to black, the background color. And now we're going to repeat the process for the bigger mountains in behind. So we're going to go to our layers again. We need to bear in mind that these two mountains will sit in front. So we're going to tap on the sky. I'm going to create a new layer above that. And then we're going to create our bigger mountains in the back here. So I don't want them to start from the center. I want them to start sort of slightly off to the right so that we can create the lumps and bumps. But everything's focused then into the center. So we're going to draw in our bigger mountains here. Some big lumps, nice big peaks as well. Something like that. And then go all the way around and link up to your start point. And then drag and drop the color in to fill the space. Now again, because we're working with two different tones of black for the minute, you won't be able to see them. Let's do the same on the other side. So let's go to our layers and create another new layer. And we're building up all the structure in this design now until we get into the lighting and shading. And then we're going to do the same process. We're going to start roughly here. And I'm literally just squiggling my pen up and down to create some really cool texture in there. And I've gone all the way around out to the left hand side there, really high. Gone all the way around and then drag and drop the color in like so, and we should end up with that nice sort of pointing V shape directing the user's eye straight into the middle. At this point you could pause and maybe make any adjustments you want to. So now we've got our mountains in place and our sea in position ready, we can go ahead now and start to add in some details. So let's get started with the main sort of focus of this, which is the lightning. So we're going to go to our layers and we're going to go into the sky at the bottom here and create a new layer. We're then going to go to our colors and we're going to switch the color out to white by double tapping in the top left, or I've put white in the palette here. We're then going to go to our brush library. We're going to scroll up until you find the weather collection, and we're going to use just these two brushes at the bottom here, this lightning 2 and lightning 3. I'm going to select lightning 3. Now, quick disclaimer, this brush is a little bit funny to use. When you sort of place it down, it's not a matter of tapping a stamp, because that only made the tiniest little thunderbolt there in the background. You need to drag it sort of left to right and scale it up with your pen. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of start over here, drag to the left, and eventually you should get it placed on the screen, but I didn't make the brush, so I'm not sure as to why it does that. So I'm going to swipe from left to right, and eventually I should get a placement of the lightning. And then what I can do is I can grab my cursor. Let's go and position this one up in this top left hand corner, and let's try and make sure it comes quite low down the screen, but not all the way down. So something like that looks pretty good. Now we're going to create a second new layer for the lightning on the other side, and then we'll merge them together afterwards. So then on this new layer, let's go to our brush library and select lightning 2. And the same principles you need to bear in mind as the last brush. So I'm going to make my brush size bigger, about 30%, and then just drag onto the screen until I get the size I'm looking for. And I can grab my cursor and then position this one up in the top right hand corner and grab the uniform option if you want to scale that up. I want it to sort of drop in behind that mountain peak on the right hand side there. So something roughly like, let's go for that. Let's add some nice strong lightning in the sky there. And now when you're happy with your lightning positions, we are going to grab our layers and we're going to pinch the two of them together. And now what we're going to do is we're going to build up a lot of the color with this style. So we're first of all going to go onto this layer. We are going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. That will punch out a lot of the white. Next, what we want to do is then swipe it to the left again and duplicate it. And that will then give us a layer that we can mess with. So we're going to tap on that layer and use the option of alpha lock. So now you could only technically paint within the boundaries of the lightning, but we're going to go up to our colors and we're going to select this purple here in the top left hand corner. And then we're going to go back to our layers. We're going to tap on this alpha lock layer and fill it, and it will only fill it in within those spaces that we alpha locked. Then if we tap on that and turn off the alpha lock, we're going to end up using some of the layer effects now. So we're going to tap on the N. We're going to scroll down until we hit the option of add. Now what this will do is it will give a lot more purple into that color, and we want to build it up within it so it's nice and bright, but also we get a lot of color from it. And then we're also going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it one more time to get even more of that purple glow in there. So that's like layering some color on top. Let's layer some color underneath. So let's go to the bottom version out of this lightning. Now, if you want to try and stay organized at this point, we can swipe on all 4 of our lightning layers for the minute and hit group. And we're going to tap on that group. We're going to rename it and we're going to call it lightning. And that will just keep things nice and organized, and we can collapse that down in the future. So as I said, let's add some color at the bottom. So let's swipe on this white layer and duplicate it. Now the bottom one out of the 2, we're going to start adding in some pinks in here. So we're going to tap on that layer and do the same trick. We're going to alpha lock it. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to select this really punchy pink. We're going to go back to that layer. We're going to tap on it and we're going to use the option of fill. And we're going to tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. And now we're going to do 2 things. We're going to swipe on it to the left and duplicate it. So we've got 2 of them and we'll end up with 6 of our lightning. So that's the last of the lightning that we need to do, but we just need to add some effects to it. So the top one out of the 2, we're going to create a big blur. So we're going to go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer. I'm going to swipe it from left to right until we hit something really punchy. So something roughly around about 18 to 20% should do. And hit your adjustments when you're done. And we've blurred that color out. All we're doing there is just starting to smudge it out a little bit. And you can see this side, especially because this one's a little bit brighter, is going to really start to blast out some of that color and really punch it out in the sky. We're then going to go to our layers again, and then we're going to look at the other pink layer that we had, and we're going to do the same effect, but we're going to do it ever so slightly less. So we're going to go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and we are going to swipe and we're going to add in, let's add in a small amount of glow in there, something roughly around about 8 or 9%. So I'm going to hit it smack bang in the middle, about 8.5. And then we've got our lightning nicely coloured in. We've got some really nice colours in there. Certain areas are purple, certain areas are pink, and this side over here is just wild. So next we're going to go to our layers. Let's collapse this lightning group down. I'm going to look at the background now for a second, because these 2 areas over here would create quite a lot of glow. So this layer here in the background, we're going to create a new layer above it. We're going to go to our brush and we're going to do the same orb trick. So we're going to grab the purple in the top left hand corner. We're going to go to our brush library and we're going to go back down to the airbrushing and the soft brush, and again just tap in the middle of the screen to get a little orb glow. And the next thing we're going to do is grab our cursor. We're going to scale it up. You don't need to zoom out this time, but we're just going to scale it so that there's some lighting coming from this left hand side. So if you see and watch my orb moving around the screen, we're in control of where the lighting's coming from. So we're just going to push it up into this top left hand corner like so, and then hit your cursor when you're done. And then we're going to go to our layers again. I'm going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it, and then we're going to grab our cursor and we're going to flip it horizontally and then just move it all the way up until we hit that right hand side edge. So now we've got 2 glows coming from either side of our night sky there. And the only thing I want to now do is go to my layers, and the very background glow, we're just going to lower the opacity down on that slightly until we hit something around about 75%. This will darken up the center of the sky, but give those brighter areas on the right hand side and left hand side their space to be nice and punchy. So now that that's done, we can start to now work on the shading and highlights for the mountains, and we're going to continue down the design basically until we get to Cooper and him in the water. So we're going to go to our mountain groups here, and for the sake of keeping things nice and organized again, let's swipe on all 4 and let's group them together, and we can just collapse that down. We know what they are if we want to, but on the left hand side we're going to start first. So this mountain here on this left hand edge, so I'm going to create a new layer above it, and we're going to tap on it and make sure it's a clipping mask, because I don't want to paint directly on it just yet. I want to potentially merge them together afterwards. So I'm going to go to my brush library now. I'm going to go to painting, and we're going to use the dry brush. Now this brush will give us a lot of detail in the mountains as if we were drawing them all in manually, but it will give you a nice little random area of texture which will look really good with this style. And on this layer we're going to continue using this purple colour, the dark one in the top left hand corner, to keep the palette all very mono, and my brush size is set to 4%. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at where our hills are coming down. So all of our hills are pointing down to this right hand side, so we want to kind of angle our brush like this, so top left to bottom right in a sense, and a diagonal like that, and we're going to just draw in some hillsides. Now, as I mentioned with this brush, you can get away with using it and it will create a lot of the texture in the mountain. So this top peak here, if I start here and start to press and draw down like so, it will start to add in lots of little flakes for this brush. But if I draw in like a line down diagonally, it will draw in an extra peak in there. You can see all the lines and now the painting marks from this brush all facing the same direction. So if we zoom right in here, you can see what I mean is it's created a lot of texture in there, and we're just going to continue with the same angle the whole way on this left hand side, and then when we get to the other side we'll change the angle so it's the opposite way. So top left to bottom right in a sense, and you want to make your way down the mountain. So all of these like little peaks over here you can use as your guide to like start to draw in some hills and maybe create like a bump in here or two. But all of this is where the lightning is going to brighten up our night hillside here. So maybe we create some extra peaks in here, which is why at the beginning, if you want to create some really strong peaks in your mountains, it will really help with this style. So if you want to just quickly make any adjustments, it's time to do it. And this is the time consuming part, it's just shading in these mountains and making your way down their hillsides. Take a look at where the lightning is facing as well. So you want to try and make sure you hit all the peaks in the correct spaces. So really the left side for me, a lot of the mountain won't be hit, but there is a little bit of lighting here. So we will need to just maybe add in a little bit of lighting on the back side of this mountain, such as here, and just really brighten up that top edge. And like I said, this brush is great because it'll add in so much texture for you, but you can really start to build up the color. As always, I love to build up the color in all of the tutorials, and we're just making our way all the way down these mountain sides, adding in the lighting and the texture. So I'm just going to continue doing that now, making sure I get the peak of this mountain, creating these lovely little sort of divots and sort of scratch marks almost in this mountain side. You know, they're not straight down, they're a little bit jaggedy, but it's all the little hillsides in there. And then let's take a look right down here as well. So the lightning is right above it and making our way all the way down. And at some point you will hit that layer that we drew in front. You see here, the layer in front is starting to affect where I'm painting. So you can see that all of our line work here eventually ends with that mountain in front. So I'm actually going to leave mine alone as it is like that for the minute. I'm going to do the layer in front of it now. So I'm going to go back to my layers and we're going to find the one in front, which is this one here. And what you can do is you can turn off that mountain in the background for a second and then work on this layer. So create a new layer, tap on it and make sure it's a clipping mask. And then with this, you want to draw in those mountain edges. Now, one thing we want to avoid, if I draw all the way down very quickly and quite harshly with the pen, you can see this mountain here starts here and ends here where it hits the water. We don't want to meet this line. So what I mean by that is, I'll do it right next to it, we want to go across here like so, but we don't want to go all the way down until we hit that line. Okay, because we want to try and smoothly transition into the water. We don't want a lot of the water, like a solid line up against our mountain edge there. So if I delete that over here, on the right hand side is what you want to try and achieve. So I'm going to carry on now from this point and look at all of my nice peaks in here, creating some nice color in there. And don't worry if you do go all the way down, just switch your brush back out to the same brush. So go to your eraser and go to painting and the dry brush, and you can just erase part of it, but it will use the same texture then. So if I switch back to my brush, we can continue adding in these lovely big lighting patches on these mountains where that lightning is just lighting up the whole scene. And we end up with some nice dark patches as well. You don't want to make the whole thing purple, you want to add in some really nice darker areas and some hillside as well. So something like that is good. And you want to keep your brush going at the same angle, because if I randomly change this brush will start to smudge the previous work you've done. So you want to try and avoid that as much as possible so that you don't end up with lines shooting all over the place. And getting a bit brave here with some of the colour, especially up on the top edges. That's fine, you can add a lot of colour up on there if you want to. Down here as well in this little peak. So you can see there, we've got a nice amount of lighting in there. That's looking good. Just adding in some much brighter areas on those peaks. Cool, so if I go back to my layers now and I turn on the mountain in behind, we've got our two mountains sort of stacked in front of one another, and that's added in a ton of texture to this scene. We can do the same now on the other side. So we're going to repeat the process. I'm going to go back to our layers, and this mountain layer in the background, we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to tap on that layer and use the option of clipping mask. And again, as I mentioned, you want to angle your brush now the opposite way. So we did it top left to bottom right. We now want to do top right to bottom left, just so that the angles again are all forcing the user's eye down and into the center. So we're going to go along this mountain edge here, and we are going to go all the way down, creating some really nice light areas in this mountain. And look at that straight away. If I zoom right in on that, you see we've got some lovely nice dark patches where the lighting isn't hitting. Maybe it's a groove or a divot in the mountain. And like I said, this brush will do all of the work for you. It's a great brush for something like this. Some nice random rocky textures. Let's go up here and create some really huge, big lighting areas. So this could be a really huge peak here. Something like that. And let's continue all the way down, looking at where the lighting hits on that mountain. Again, you've got a bit of lighting here, so maybe it does hit the other side up here. Just creating some nice, very sharp, angular mountains, and maybe even link up some of your lines. You know, like here, I'll link the two of them together and create that nice big surface now. It's like become one big piece of mountain. And continuing, I'm just going to add in some extra texture down the hill. So this one's looking a little bit brighter than the other side, and that's not a problem. We can go back if we want to and level it up. Let's repeat the process then. So let's go back to our layers and look at the layer in front of it. So let's create a new layer, tap on it and use the clipping mask. Let's turn off the mountains in the background so we can see our edge that we need to work with. And we can see the edge here. So I'm going to go down this side. And you kind of want to start outside of your mountains in a sense and then come into the shape. So that's how I get that bright edge on the mountain there. Add in some colour here where the lightning is just in behind. And then likewise, let's come down this mountain part here, all of these little smaller hills. Nice and bright into the centre. And there's not really a right or wrong way to do this. I would just leave gaps of black. So that helps the illusion that the mountain has those sort of bigger grooves in it. That's the only piece of advice really. So I've done that mountain in front. We can then go back to our layers and turn on the hillside in the background. And now I've got my two hills, just like on the other side, all pointing inwards. So just quickly, I'm going to go and touch this side up and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've leveled out my sides now to the point where I'm happy with the amount of colour on both sides. Just making sure that either side has a similar amount of colour. I'm actually going to zoom in so you can get an idea of how much colour I've actually put in here, because when I zoom out the camera it looks like there's not so much in there because some of it's very fine. But like you can see, there's lots of small, very light pieces of art in there. So next what we're going to do is we're going to add in some really punchy highlights on the mountains. Now for this we're going to use the bright pink colour in the palette, which is this colour here. And then we're going to go to our mountain layers, and each one we are going to add in a nice highlight. Now I'm done with the texture on the mountains, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to apply both. So every layer that we clip to a mountain, we're going to pinch them together to save on our layers. So we're going to pinch those two together, we're going to pinch those two together and continue all the way up. You should end up with 4 mountains again, but all the colour has now been applied. Now we're going to emphasize a lot of the highlights, so we're going to create a new layer above the first mountain we're going to work on, which is the top one in the back right hand side. I'm going to create a new layer and tap on it and clipping mask it. We're then going to go up to our brush library. I'm going to use the airbrush for this one, so we're going to the airbrushing and the soft brush and scale that down to about 7%, maybe even smaller. Let's go for about 2%, and we're going to punch out on this hillside where we want a lot of lighting to hit. So looking at your peaks and looking at where the lightning itself is hitting, something like that is going to be really nice and punchy. And being very light with it though. We don't want to go too crazy with this. We don't want everything looking too jazzy, too punchy. Now we're going to tap on that layer now, and we're going to scroll its layer option down to the option of add. Now when we look at the layer, you'll see why I went really light, because it's now going to punch it out and make it really bright in certain areas, and we don't want it to be too bright. So if it is too bright, don't undo your work, simply go to your layer and then lower the opacity down, and that will give you the option of choosing how punchy that will be. I'm going to leave mine at 100% because I was happy with the pressure that I applied. And we're going to repeat that process now for all 4. So we're going to go to our layers. So let's go to the mountain side on the left now, create a new layer, tap on that layer and clip it. Let's change it straight to add now, so we can see how much pressure and what effect we're actually painting on there straight away. So then we'll go to the left hand side now, and let's look at where the lightning's hitting, so we can add in some color up here. I am being super light. Now if your pen doesn't have pressure sensitivity, lower your opacity down with this slider on the left hand side and build up the color. There's no need to rush straight into the color, you can just build it up. I'm just going to emphasize some of the sort of ridges up there as well, a little bit down this edge here where this lightning bolt here would punch into this mountain, likewise here as well. And it's just more like edge highlighting really, just really punching out some color and really emphasizing how much lighting is being hit onto these mountainsides from the lightning in the sky. So we'll continue to add in some more color, streaking it down as I'm doing it there, and I'm pretty happy with that. I think that emphasizes it quite a lot. So next let's go to our layers. Let's continue on to the next mountain area, so it's the right hand side at the front. So we're going to tap on that layer and create a new layer, and we're going to tap on the layer and make sure it's a clipping mask again. Let's change it straight to add so we know what we're drawing in, and then going back to the right hand side and reduce my brush size back down to about 3%. I'm just going to paint in these mountain edges with some nice punchy colors, something really emphasize that side. Likewise down here as well, and likewise in these sort of spaces down here, something like that. So that last piece was probably a bit too bright, but something like that looks pretty good. I'm very happy with that. Let's move on to the left hand side. So let's create a new layer above our mountain side on the left. So new layer, tap on it, clipping mask, and change the layer straight away to add. And let's have a look at this left hand side. We can maybe paint in some lighting in certain areas. Now I've realized I've not added much texture in here at all, so I'm just going to paint in a very light edge there, and then continue up our mountain side in the front, and then also add in some nice color on these edges, and especially on the tips of these in front, you can maybe punch out a little bit more of the color if you want to, just to sort of separate it from the mountains in the back. And then pinching out 2 fingers, we've got our mountain side now on either side done for this particular design. Let's now look at the sea layer in front. So we've done the background sort of process now, we can move on to the sea. So what we're going to do is we're going to pinch all these layers firstly together because we're done with them for our mountains. So again, pinch the 2 layers together, the clipping mask layer and the mountain, and that will finish off all of that. We can collapse that group down now. Now this glow that we made in the background at the very top, which is this layer at the bottom, we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. I'm going to drag it now above the sea layer. Then what we're going to do is we're going to grab our cursor, we are going to flip it vertically, and then we're going to drag it straight down, and then we are going to grab our freeform option and scale that down until we end up with a glow sort of here. So we don't want to see that edge of the sea, we don't want to show that straight line, but this will be used in a second for the actual background color. And then we're going to tap on the cursor when we're done, and I'm just going to lower the opacity down on it even more to say 50% just for a moment. We may come in and tweak it in a second. Let's go ahead now and let's actually group these layers together because we're going to be working now on the sea. So group, and we don't need to name them. If you want to, go ahead and do so. Let's create a new layer above that, and let's switch our color out now to white. Now we're going to use a brush that's built in but probably not used that often. If we go to elements, we have this oceans brush, And what we can do is, you want to keep your canvas perfectly straight. If we rotate the canvas, your C is going to be all over the place. So we want to keep our canvas nice and straight, and you could zoom in a little bit or move your canvas up, just make sure it's perfectly straight up. Let's increase our brush size to roughly around about 80, let's max it out, let's go to 100%. And what we're going to do is we're going to stroke from left to right until we fill in a lot of the colour. Now don't take your brush off of the screen. What we're aiming to do here, guys, is go from left to right and fade up, and as we get close to the C edge, we want to be super light. So I'm going to go from left to right here, and these waves down here can be nice and bright, that's fine. And then as I start to get closer up to the top, I'm now really fading out that colour, and I'm leaving it exactly like that. So all we're really seeing now is the lighting right around Cooper, and we don't want to be looking at anything that's going on in the background further up in the scene. Now what we're going to do is we're going to build up some of the colour in these waves as well. So we're going to go onto that layer, we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it, which will make it nice and bright and white. We're going to tap on that layer and we're going to turn it to add, which will start to punch out a lot of the colour. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer above this. We're going to tap on it and clip it. And now we're going to use the purple in the palette, so the main purple here. We're then going to grab our airbrushing. So we're going to go back up to our brush library and airbrushing and the soft brush. Make brush size kind of big, around about 15% maybe. And we're going to paint in some colour, which will then start to affect the scene. So we want to add in some purple here, and most definitely up here where it fades out, and leave a little bit of white. So what I've kind of done is I've added purple from here upwards and here downwards, but in this gap here I've left a little bit of white. That way we end up with some really nice crisp, very beautiful white lines right in front of us, right in front of the scene that we're actually looking at it from. And then we're going to go to our layers, we're going to tap on that layer, and we're going to go all the way down until we hit the option of pin light. Now this will be where the whole scene starts to kind of come alive with the colour anyway, because all of these now will have that sort of little purple hue to it, but a little bit of the sort of ocean in front of us here has got some really punchy white lines. Now the only thing I will do is, though, I'm going to go to the add layer here, the white one. I'm just going to tone it down slightly to roughly around about 75%. Now we need our astronaut, we need Cooper. So where are we going to position him and how are we going to do it? First of all, we're going to go up to our layers and create a new layer. We're going to go to our colours and we're going to double tap to select white, or select white from the palette. We're going to go to the stamp that I've provided in the description. Now this is the same one that we used in the other tutorial. So we're going to use this brush here, which is Spaceman 3. And we're going to tap in the middle of the screen, and my brush size was set to roughly around about, what's that, 81% I think? At 51%. It doesn't really matter because we can grab Cooper and we're going to scale Cooper up until we get him roughly around about this size. Now you want to make sure he's perfectly down the center as well, so you want to go to snapping and make sure snapping is turned on, and we want to position him so we get that orange line running down the middle to make sure we know he's nice and central. And then let's position him roughly here so that his helmet is just coming up and out past these mountains. You can maybe lower it down a little bit, but his hands here are going to be nicely in the water. So if I tap on my cursor here, we've still got a little bit obviously excess of Cooper underneath. So what we're going to do is we are going to simply go to our layers, we're going to tap on Cooper and we're going to create a mask. And then on the mask layer, you'll know which one you're on because it's the darker one. We are going to paint with black. Now what that will do is that will erase part of Cooper, but he's not permanently erased. We can draw it back in. White draws it back in and black erases. And what we're going to do is let's actually use the same painting brush. Let's use the dry brush, scale that up to around about 30% and just smudge him out like this. So what that will do is it should eventually end up leaving us maybe a little bit of Cooper's body sort of poking through the water, but not very much. We don't want a lot anyway. So we want to aim to go up to just behind his elbow and all the way across his hand. So pretty much just his thumb is just poking out of the water. So something like this. We're getting closer now to the point where we can crack on. And let's keep going across. And I think that, minus that one, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. That'll allow us to then see a tiny bit of Cooper's body. We probably won't see it, to be honest, but it's just there in case. And he's just floating up and out of the water. Maybe even we could go a little bit higher. Let's be bold and brave. Something like that. Okay, so now Cooper's obviously in the wrong colour for this. So let's tap on Cooper and his body and invert. And then we'll get Cooper's outline. Now you may need to invert this back in a second because we're going to add in some edge highlighting on him to make sure he's nice and punchy. So if you are struggling to see with against sort of the mountain and where the shapes are, what you could do is grab a sort of dark grey, so something maybe in this sort of space, and then go to Cooper, alpha lock him, and then fill, and then un-alpha lock him so that you can then see the shapes. And we can also change him back to black afterwards, it doesn't really matter. Cool, so now let's get Cooper into his environment a little bit more. So let's create a new layer above. Let's tap on that layer and clip it to Cooper. And now let's start to add in some of the highlights. So as always, you build the color up. So you want to start with something nice and light and build in the majority of your lighting. And then you want to go in and add those really crisp highlights. So let's go to this purple here first. And all we're going to use for this to start with is the soft brush. So we're going to go up to our airbrushing under our brush library and soft brush and reduce the brush size down to roughly around about 2% maybe. And what we want to do is just look at where everything's coming from. It's coming from both angles here. So he's actually going to be dual lit from both sides. So we have to bear that in mind. And there's a lot of vertical coming down lighting. So if we look at his right arm here, let's increase the brush size actually. Let's go to 4%. And I can see my brush with that circle. If you want to see that, go to your actions and preferences and turn on the brush cursor and you'll be able to see your circle. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add in a light bit of purple down this right hand side. Let's have a look at his helmet. His helmet's going to need something on this right hand side. Likewise the left, because we've got that dual lighting from either side. His arm over here would get a little bit of that purple. And likewise the backpack is also going to be lit up slightly. So we're going to come down this edge here. And then obviously we want to bear in mind in a second that we're going to go into his body here. So try and keep your brush within the boundary of his backpack a little bit. You don't want to go onto his neck. Now I'm going to expand on this purple here a little bit more, leaving a kind of dark patch in behind the neck. And we'll come back to that shortly. And just as we did when we actually did this tutorial, you will need to potentially zoom in on certain points and isolate them. So we can, for example, let's reduce our brush size and try and do it manually. If we go down to 1%, this tube here needs a little bit of lighting on it. So we'll add that lighting in on the right hand side. Likewise, the unit that attaches the pipe and maybe a little under highlight here as well. Likewise, the ear cup up here. So we're going to go round the ear cup and highlight that. Likewise, it needs a little bit of lighting just on the left hand side as well because of the lightning coming from both sides. And then let's look at the helmet as well. We want to add in some lighting in these small sections where the texture of the helmet is now being lit up from both sides. So essentially I'm creating like an outline around most of the pieces. A little piece here, a little piece here, especially on this visor because this visor is going to be super reflective. And likewise down this line here and on this right hand side. That's good. And let's zoom in and let's do the same. We're going to go around this left hand side of the helmet. We're going to go around the top even as well. And then these sort of indents in the helmet would also get some little bit of highlight on them. Likewise up here as well. And not so much on the neck, but we could add a little bit of lighting here, tiny bit in there, and just a little edge highlight there. His backpack now is going to need a little highlight just on this edge as well, something like that. And then let's go down the backpack as well. And I've tailed that off towards the bottom there. And likewise, the edge of his arm's going to need a little bit of colour, like so. And let's move over to this right hand side where his knuckle is just sticking out of the water here. And likewise his wrist. And then a little highlight all the way up his arm. Using these lines that I've drawn in the stamp. Just to give those little extra bits of texture. And now Cooper's got a lot more of his shading. Now at this point we can definitely go back in to Cooper himself, alpha lock him, and then go to our colors, double tap to select black, and then go back to that layer and fill. And you should now be able to see Cooper a lot more in his environment in terms of you can see the lighting that you've drawn in on either side. Okay, so now we've got Cooper with a lot more color on him. We're actually going to start to add him a little bit more brighter edge highlights. So first of all, we're going to go to our layer and create a new one. We're going to tap on that layer and we're going to clipping mask it. And we're going to use the bright pink here, but very, very sparingly for this. So we're actually going to go to our brush and make sure it's about 3%. I'm actually going to make sure I go even softer by making sure my opacity is down to about 50% here. And we just want to edge in some pink. Now that was too bright, so we're just going to edge in some pink. Now what we also want to do is sort of emphasize his body position. So a little bit of pink, maybe just very lightly over the top of the shoulder, around the wrist a little bit, onto the back of his hand, and maybe just emphasize a little bit more of his arm there. Then let's go back up to his helmet. Let's just emphasize this edge with a little bit of pink. That's looking good. And likewise, let's do the opposite side as well. Very sparingly, very light. And then likewise, just down the backpack, let's redo that. Let's go across the top of the backpack, down this left hand side, and then let's add in a little bit here on his left arm. So if we zoom out, and now what we're going to do is we're going to now add in some lovely bright edge highlighting. So let's now go to our colors and switch it out to white. And I'm going to increase my brush size opacity back up to 100 and lower the brush size down to about 2%. And for this, I'm going to add in a lot of lovely bright white in certain areas. So this is just above the knuckle. And the white now will really start to sort of, rather than it just be a purple that's bouncing off onto him, we're really going to see a lot of color sort of disappear, and this white lighting will really emphasize what's happening here with the lighting situation. So something like that, just over on top of his shoulder. That's looking good. Let's go around the front. So as I mentioned, with all these different shapes, we want to emphasize all of them. So we want to go around the edge of his mask and his visor. I'm going to reduce the brush size down to 1%, and we're just going to edge in some of these lovely shapes in the stencil. So around here, around the edge of his ear cup. We can go across the top of the visor if we want to, and likewise the underside of that sort of top half. And then all of these shapes in here, I just want to add in a lovely highlight in there. And likewise, we added a highlight in here, around the top. Let's go around to this left hand side now, where we can go all the way around the edge here. And then likewise into this gap as well. See, that was quite a brave one in there. Let's go for it, let's keep it. Let's peek around the top there. A little bit around the back of his neck, but just a smidge. His backpack needs a lovely little highlight on it. And I'm actually going to go all the way into this gap here and go all the way across to highlight that. And I'm then going to emphasize it a bit more on this left hand side, because where the lighting's coming straight down onto him, this would be emphasized because the backpack is sort of backwards on him a little bit. It would be getting its own lighting. Let's do the tube here that we did previously, just edging in that highlight like so. Just going to add in a little bit there in the corner. And then let's go do his left arm, little smidge over the top here. A little smidge here as well. And a little bit there, just into the water. And then take a look at what you've done and try and balance it out a little bit. So there may be areas you want to emphasize a little bit more. For example, I just looked at my left hand side there, and this right hand side's a little bit dull in comparison. So I'm actually going to go in and highlight some of those textures. And bring the highlight with you if you want. What I mean by that is just bring it down the body ever so slightly. As long as you add in that punchy area, you're emphasizing what is nice and bright. So, just bring it with you a little bit. Likewise, let's go look at the visor again. Maybe add in a lot more white on there. Something like that. Looks pretty good. And now the helmet is the only thing I want to sort of highlight even more. I want to go in and just increase my brush size down up to about 4%, and just in a circular motion on the left and the right hand side, just add in a little bit more white to highlight how bright that lighting is on either side. Then when we zoom out, we're going to go to the layer. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go to our layers and swipe it to the left and duplicate it, and then go to our layer options and go down to the option of add. But bear in mind how bright you've done it. So take a look at mine. Mine's too bright now that I've done that. So I'm actually just going to lower the opacity down. And what we want to do is we do want to make sure that those edges are nice and bright, but not too much. So I'm going for 30% in mine, simply because I know how much lighting I've put in here on Cooper. Yours may vary, so just balance it up so that you can get an idea for the white from either side of the lightning on him and his body. Now the one thing that's fairly obvious straight away here as well is that Cooper just needs a shadow here that's being reflected into the water. Now we're actually going to just do this manually. We're going to go to our layers, and then underneath Cooper but above our sort of pink purple layer here, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to switch the color out to black, and we're going to go to our soft brush and our air brush, and we're going to go for about 6 or 7% here. And look at him, he's a triangle in a sense, isn't he? You go from arm to arm up here, so just draw in a triangle very lightly to this point and to this point, and then fill in the gap like so. And then that will give Cooper a lovely light shadow being cast on the waves in behind him, and we'll start to emphasize where he is. Now this shadow may end up slightly too dark in comparison to the water around it. So what you can do is go up to your adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and then just swipe it from left to right until you maybe just soften up that edge a little bit more. So I've gone for about 18% there nearly. I'm going to tap on the adjustments because we're done with that. And now if we zoom out with 2 fingers and we go full screen with 4, pop my pen on the top because we are done with today's tutorial. So we've moved on with Cooper into his new part of his adventure. He's gone through the portal onto the other side. He fell down into the river, and he's now been faced with the weather that's in front of him on a location he doesn't know. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, be sure to drop a like down below. Helps the channel out an awful lot. And if you'd like weekly Procreate tutorials, hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the notification bell. As always, be sure to share your designs with me on Instagram. Again, links in the description. And a huge shout out to my patrons. I'll throw their names up on the screen now. Or if you'd like to get some exclusive tutorials that are only for Patreon users, hit the link in the description down below and show your support. And I'll see you in the next one.